Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I know for those of us in the Caribbean, these are still very uncertain times. So on behalf of the team, I want to thank you all for taking the time to be here. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that we're having this conversation on the traditional territory of the Taino, and we're able to do this largely because they stewarded the land before us. We'll start with some introductions, then get into Laura's presentation, and leave enough time at the end for a Q&A. I'll start with our organization, Island City Lab. We're a Caribbean-focused think tank that takes a network-based approach to confront the critical issues affecting island cities. Islands are some of the most urbanized places on Earth. They're also the most vulnerable to economic and climate disasters. How we plan, design, and think about our cities need to be relevant to our context, and we believe that islands have the capacity at home to confront these challenges. We're absolutely excited to collaborate with CASA again. We believe that leadership comes from diverse places and spaces, and these student leaders are definitely paving a way for a more just and equitable built environment in the Caribbean. I'll turn it over to Gianna from CASA for their introduction.
So hello everyone, welcome. Thank everyone for coming. My name is Gianna. I'm editor at CASA. We are the Caribbean Architecture Students Association, based at the Caribbean School of Architecture. And our kind of goal is to connect the students of architecture with the profession itself. So we're really excited for this conversation to happen and these series to continue to happen. So for our guest today, her name is Laura Naranyansingh. She's a registered architect and the director of ACLA Architecture, one of Trinidad and Tobago's first indigenous architectural practices. She is focused on illuminating Trinidad's history and culture through architecture and design, and is a member of the Trinidad and Tobago Institute of Architects. So as a student of classical architecture and new urbanism, Laura strives to bring the beauty of and order and discipline to the built environment. And she strongly believes that a country's architecture is a reflection of its culture. So through though small in population, there's no obvious or defining Trinidadian culture per se. Therefore, finding a unique Trinidadian architectural language is enormously complex. However, it remains a necessary task that we find cohesive, nuanced ways of articulating our style as a people. And this kind of investigation is what fuels Laura's work as a designer. And she's involved in a diverse range of local design practices, including, but not limited to, costume design for Trinidad Carnival. So yeah, we would like to give it over to her so she can present. Thank you.
Thanks, Gianna. Hi, everybody. I am Laura Narayansingh. I am going to share my screen. Thanks to Island City Lab for having me. Give me one sec to share. All right. So I am Laura. I am 30 years old. I am a mom of a 2-year-old, a wife of a 32-year-old. I am a director of ACLA Architecture, one of 3. I am a board member of the creative industries, Trinidad and Tobago Creative Industries, and board member of Fashion TT as well. And I am a registered architect and a very, very proud Trini. I am super grateful for this opportunity to speak on women and women in the profession in particular. And I'll just take you quickly through a timeline of my journey to this point. I started school in 2009 at the University of Miami School of Architecture, and I graduated in 2014 with a double minor in urban studies and art, and a bachelor's of architecture. And I kind of immediately started to work at ACLA Architecture in 2014. It was ACLA Works at the time. In 2015, I became a board member of the Creative Industries, Trinidad and Tobago Creative Industries Limited. And then in 2018, I became a registered architect, registered with the Board of Architecture, Trinidad and Tobago. And when I was 8 months pregnant in 2019, I was offered the position of director at ACLA Architecture, which I assumed after I had my son in 2020. So just a fun fact, I think it's really important, especially as I progress in the presentation, that you have an idea of where we stand right now in Trinidad. And 25% of our architects in Trinidad are registered. Women, sorry. There are about 80-something registered architects total. So we really make up a minority, first of all, and then the women make up even, less of that figure. But it's really important to understand, I think, that, we stand on the shoulders of the women who came before us. So 25 may seem like a little bit now, but it was a lot at one point. And, there's no stopping us. We're going to get to 50 and above. I'm going to quickly run through my flow. So what I'm going to speak to is just basically my journey, theory to practice, my focus in general in architecture, and my experience being a woman in the field, and just touch on some works that we've been working on during the pandemic, basically 2020 to 2022 at ACLA Architecture. So theory to practice. So I started my theory, everything that I did was by hand, especially for the first, I think I got into the computer at school in my 4th year, because University of Miami is largely a classical school, well, it was at the time. And my dean was Elizabeth Plater-Zyberg, a woman who was the founder of New Urbanism. So I studied classical architecture and New Urbanism for practically my entire time at University of Miami. I think one merit of learning by hand is that you really have to put a lot of thought into what you're going to put on that paper, because there's really no erasing it. So I think it definitely drives a certain sensitivity to architecture that I think is invaluable. When I was at University of Miami, I was able to study. I did a semester abroad in Italy, and that 6-month period of my life really provoked thoughts about the city and walkability. And I think it certainly influenced my professional standpoint, right, today. And in my final year studio, I have colleagues whose final year studios were, city planning and whatnot, but I got to plan a monument to Dwight D. Eisenhower. Quite the opposite of my colleagues, I'm sure. But what I do appreciate about this kind of project is, again, the attention to detail. And, today in the design build culture we live in the Caribbean, everything is rushed. Architecture is backburnered, just give us a design quickly and let's get this thing built. But it really does remind me, especially when I think about it, that, buildings are meant to last. They're meant to have an impact. They are meant to make a statement and to evoke feeling. And that can't happen overnight, It really requires careful thought and planning. So in 2014, as mentioned, I started at ACLA Architecture. And, I genuinely think it's been sort of an invaluable experience. I graduated in, as I said, 2014. And I think a few months I had a gap between then and starting. And I think in that gap, I really thought, I'm going to build a brand for myself. I'm going to make it on my own. But really, I couldn't have been more wrong. There's really nothing more important than a team, and having a team of people that, I think in ACLA, we all have incredibly different strengths and weaknesses, and we come together really well. And the amount that I've learned from my mentors and colleagues is incredible. So I'm grateful for the experience thus far. ACLA, just a bit on ACLA, is really a firm that practices kind of Caribbean modernism, and the firm has done tons and tons of projects throughout the region, and of course, well, mainly in Trinidad, that are really noteworthy. Some are built, some are unbuilt, and a lot of them have won awards. This is the Church of the Assumption in Maribel, Trinidad, and it's an incredible piece of architecture, standing, looking exactly like this today. And more recently, we won an award for this large office commercial building, a data center for a corporate enterprise in Trin City. And I think I'm really proud to be working for a firm that has produced such notable architecture throughout the years. But it doesn't come with, easily. It really takes a lot of work. The practice really has worked on its image over the years. We've transitioned several times. We've changed brands, year after year, well, years after years, just to maintain our image in general, to be fresh, to be resilient. This latest iteration of our brand, ACLA Architecture, is really a sort of applied to become a bit more approachable. Again, the culture of architecture has changed drastically in the Caribbean. And, I think we kind of have to fight for our place. We have to fight to prove why we are necessary. And we're fighting. I think that's the moral of the story through our rebrand. We really are fighting to remain fresh and relevant and remind people that we are there to serve them. It's not about us, it's about our clients and it's about our society. So my focus is really on looking at the bigger picture and how it relates to the smaller picture. The bigger picture being our city and our environment and our culture, and how that relates to, in the end, our clients. Through ACLA, we've had many discussions, coffee break discussions about our city. And I think we've kind of come to the resolve that the only way that we can really affect change is by possibly passive interventions. So small interventions throughout the city, small but many. And we have been working on a few concepts, a few ideas. I'll present one kind of at the end of the slideshow. But I think the camaraderie in the firm is really important. This map was produced as a labor of love. Myself and some of my colleagues literally drove around Port of Spain and documented the typology of different buildings in downtown, uptown, Woodbrook, Belmont, St. James, and St. Clair. And it was no easy task. It took a few years while a few interns came in and out and helped us. And this is the product of that. And it's a timestamp. I mean, things change all of the time in cities. But I think, it really kind of caused us to look at what's going on right now and how this sprawl that we are experiencing kind of has happened and manifested. This is actually the heart of the city, Port of Spain, and you can see the map of Trinidad. We've really sort of spread out from the heart, and it's to the point where right now the heart of the city is sort of vacant almost. It's lacking life. There's been a mass exodus, and it's kind of telling in the fact that the real estate prices have kind of plummeted. A 100 square foot office building on Queen Street, which was, sorry, I should say that I did this research on one of the real estate agent sites. I think it was Terra Caribbean or something. And I did this research this Monday, just so it was a quick look, and I just looked at their images online. And from what I can tell, this particular office building looked good, it looked fine. And a 1,300 square foot apartment in Maraval, which is on the outskirts of the city, came in at, $157 US per square foot, and 362 per square foot, So in the heart of our city, where the real estate should really be most valuable, it's actually quite, inexpensive right now. Onto the other point, which is our culture. I think a lot of my work in Carnival has been really immersive in terms of our culture. I've been able to get to know people and get to know the average Trinidadian and what makes them excited and happy and joyful. Because I think right now, I certainly can't say that it is our built environment. So there's something about Trinidad, but what is it? And I really do think that we have a vibrancy to us. And I'm really passionate about exploring that in our built environments and how it can manifest itself. Carnival, the question that I've asked myself is, can we experience Carnival all year round as a spirit, rather than just, a few days of the year and then it's done? And how can that reflect itself in our homes and our parks and, public spaces? I was also able to study, and I think this is kind of been important for me as well in my journey, 3 different types of buildings in Trinidad that have been built. The first one, which is actually the second image, was built in the 1900s. The second was built in the 1930s, and the third was built in I think it's 1930s, 1950s, and the 1990s. And there's really been a drastic transition in architecture from community to privacy, from openness to security, from making do with your space to wanting more and more space. And I think it's an important thing to note. And of course, our culture has to change as we evolve. But how can we, again, keep the same spirit alive in our buildings and our homes today without becoming so reclusive and obsessed about security, and allow ourselves to be open when we're ready and not prioritize the car, this is just a quote from John Noel Lewis that I read when I was in university, and I really carry it through my practice now. Architecture requires a love and a feeling for space, not only the bricks and mortar, but the space and between. It is a space in which we live, breathe, see, and hear. The architect plans for people in all their happiness, radiance, sickness, and partying. He plans the environment for living. So moving on to being a woman architect. So my grandmother was, one of 9 children. She had 5 children of her own and was the breadwinner of her family. And she became an AO5, which is essentially just below the permanent secretary level in the office of the Prime Minister. So to say that I come from a background of, I guess, matriarchs is an understatement. My grandmother was a pioneer, I cannot imagine having 5 children. I have 1 right now, and I'm like, how did she do it and still have such a successful career? She came from extremely humble means as well. My mother is currently the director of 2 of her own companies and a non-executive director of 3 companies. She, in her own right, is also an incredibly impressive woman. And I was hired underneath the first female director of ACLA architecture in 67 years, Mandalay Newton. So she was my boss. And she was the first woman that we've seen in a leadership position in this incredibly, this astounding practice in 67 years. So I say all of that to say that my journey, it really involves a lot of people, a lot of women, a lot of their support, my observation of them in their careers and how they handle their careers and their lives. And it's not easy. And I also have to say that the support of my team, ACLA is an incredibly egalitarian firm. And I think it has become that way since Mandalay's guidance. I know her path was not easy or straightforward, but she certainly made it a lot easier for me. So as women, I think it is our responsibility to ensure that when we get to the top, we bring others up with us. Because otherwise we're just, it's just going to be quite stagnant for us. It's on us to help each other. I say that, and I have to say that Gary and Ricardo, who are the other 2 directors of ACLA Architecture, Gary Turton and Ricardo Nualo, have been incredibly supportive. They are great fathers, and they are great, they're great co-workers. So I do think I am privileged in that right, but I think it's important to acknowledge that privilege and to make sure that, we bring each other up. In addition to that, I just wanted to say that an architectural practice is not made up of architects. It's made up of architects and technicians and office administrative staff, interior designers. It really is an all-encompassing team, and every single person is absolutely integral into making sure the practice runs smoothly. So I'm just going to give you guys a really quick story, again, about being a woman in the field. I became pregnant when I was on site with several projects. So of course, there are 7 to 5 stages, of a project. And fortunately enough, just my luck, I was in the final stage, the construction stage, on quite a few important projects during my pregnancy. And as a pregnant woman, I tried my very best to make sure that I did not seem weak. I was always there. I wanted to, I just hope that no one noticed I was pregnant. No mind, I'm like massive and whatever. I'm trying to just seem like, everything is good. I'm strong, up till I think I stopped work on the Wednesday and I had whites on the Friday. So I was literally on site climbing steps, XYZ, right up until the end, because I think I wanted to prove that I could do it as a woman. Like, I'm not weak because I'm pregnant, and I'm not unavailable. I'm here. My pregnancy isn't a sickness. And it's not going to hamper my career. In the end, I had my son on the 31st of January, 2020. And I got this message from one of the clients. And I've been back and forth on whether I should share this or not, but I think I should. Because I think it's important that we know as women, we have to set boundaries for ourselves, So she of course, she wrote me to say congratulations on the baby X, Y, and Z at 6:32 a.m. on the day that he was born. And she just wanted to let me know that she got the titles. I say she, because she is a woman, and she was a mother, so it's not like she wasn't aware. But on a few days later, at 2:12 a.m., I got a message, was back splashboard for the kitchen. And I responded to every message. And I'm giving you this story because I don't want you to do this. As a woman, set boundaries for yourself. You don't need to prove anything to anyone, because in the end, I don't think you actually prove anything, because at the end of that particular project, when I came back out to work, of course, I handed over the project in the office. I had spreadsheets. I had everyone up to date on where we were at. I mean, it was really close to completion. In fact, I actually had a photographer go and check it out just before I delivered my son. And, it was really almost ready to photograph. But when I got back out, unfortunately, the client didn't want to pay the final payment because they felt that I was not there in the end, which, a whole other story. But that's the reality. As a woman, these are the difficulties we face. No one wants to hear that you are having a kid, or that, you have to go home to your child, X, Y, and Z. And even if you don't have children, there will be challenges. They'll wonder, why doesn't she have kids? She's so bossy. She only cares about her career. Things that a man will never, ever, ever have to go through, you will have to go through. But it's important, I think, that you be gentle with yourself, you set boundaries, and you bring other women up. So on a lighter note, on to some projects that we are working on right now at the firm. These are projects that I'm specifically on. This one is called JNS House. It's kind of interesting to me because it's on a really, really, really narrow site, and Town and Country Planning in Trinidad has updated their setbacks and their restrictions. So a narrow site has become even narrower, but we are allowed to populate it a bit more densely, but we have to prove that we can fit the cars for the amount of the required spots for the amount of residents on site. So it's confusing. It doesn't necessarily make the world of sense, but this is sort of the shape of the building. The clients are young people who want to be able to rent a unit out. So it's a multi-family building, I should say. They want to rent a unit out and they want to live in one, and then they wanted space for entertainment. And actually that's a common thread, I feel like, in Trinidadian architecture. Everybody wants somewhere to entertain. Maybe it's global, but I feel like Trinis love a lime, So even in a small space, you can't, you have to still have lime in space. So on top of that, their neighbor built a boundary wall in their property. So the kind of narrow lot became even narrower. But in the end, this is kind of the final result. Our budget was huge, a huge deal. And we've been working with a contractor to get this thing built at just around 2 million. So it's looking likely, but difficult. And we may not be able to install, for instance, all of the detailing, which would be the frames and the sunscreens here, but hopefully we can do it eventually. Because I think it is important to protect our buildings and to make sure they're cool for their inhabitants, etc. Of course, you know that. I mean, you guys, that's priority in school, sustainability. So, but I think in ACLA and in our practice, we try to ensure that even if our client doesn't ask for it, we try to instill passive means of sustainability in all of our designs. Just a little courtyard space, of course, this can open up and, this whole space can be accessed. And then if you take this stairwell up to the rooftop. That whole rooftop is accessible. This is another kind of interesting one. I have a client who, we have a client who wanted a tennis pavilion. And I think we're seeing a lot of residential projects in light of COVID. Everyone is placing a lot of emphasis and value on the home. So the tennis pavilion is really part of a larger series of buildings. But I think this one is quite interesting because they really specifically wanted it to be a lot of things, very open, perfectly suitable for entertaining, a place to store all of their, gaming equipment. They wanted to be able to cook in here with the AC on and smell nothing. And when I say cook, I mean cook curry. So it has been a real piece of work detailing this building and ensuring that, well, fingers crossed, our final output is what they want. But also coming in on budgets. Modern architecture is really not cheap because people will look at this and think, all right, yeah, 3 million, but it takes a lot to get this building to look the way that these renders do. So just some views of the interior and that sort of thing. This one is for an amazing client, actually, and it's on a very, very steep hill, which a lot of our lots of land in Trinidad that are being developed now are quite steep because as sprawl happens and we move higher up the hills and away from the city, that's just how it goes. But we call it the House of Moods because, they really wanted to capture sort of every element of their personality in the house. Up top there where that single chair is a reading nook. But they wanted specifically to have an indoor-outdoor flow, a space for entertaining, private rooms that, if someone did not want to hear the entertaining in one area, they could, retreat, etc. I mean, it's pretty standard of almost any clients, but, I think making sure that you listen to your clients and kind of get into their psyche and their personality is really important to kind of get a final product of that is satisfactory out. Just another view of that house. So one project that I'm really excited about is called Corte El Duca. And it is a project that came to us through a planner who I hope is on the call, Ryan Dominy. He is a fellow New Urbanist fan. And he had an idea for a project in Port of Spain on Duke Street. There's a vacant-ish lot right now. And we're working on this project with Stefan Homer. He's an architect and a CSA alum as well. So it's ACLA and Stefan Homer and Ryan Dominy kind of working on this thing together. And it's highly speculative in nature, very exploratory. But we hope that it kind of acts as a catalyst, at least even if not in practice, at least in theory, for people to start thinking about the city differently and its possibilities. So it's, as I said, on Duke Street, which is right there. And the idea is that we sink the parking entirely below ground, which of course will not be cheap. Sorry, I went too far. But it is necessary that we have some parking on site. But the idea is that the car is not priority. You park in garages. There's a garage two doors down, essentially. And if you have a car and you need to park, you park it and you walk home. If you need assistance with that, there will be, possibly a valet. Water storage and the other services will go in the basement, but the priority really is not the car. Again, we know we're being radical. Of course, it's a big ask to ask people to abandon, their car. And I'm sure a lot of people on the call right now are like, yeah, nah, never gonna work. But I think it's necessary that we start to change our thinking if we want to see any kind of difference in our cities. When I lived in Italy, I had no car and I got everywhere that I needed to in a day. So, it just kind of takes a radical approach sometimes. On the ground floor level, we have a cafe or it could be a wine bar or anything really, just a space for a restaurant rental, I suppose. A shop, of course, your core, space for management and a public courtyard that is essentially accessed directly off of Duke Street that terminates in a water feature. So it really draws you in and it's on grade level. The entire project has kind of been pulled as close to the setbacks as possible. And Ryan has a plan and he's worked very hard to, negotiate the setbacks necessary. I think he's worked hard on setbacks in general for Port of Spain and planning and use in Port of Spain. But in these spaces that are provided to us by balconies above, we plan to have, seating, restaurant seating, etc. So we hope to have a really active front corridor that is cool and shaded and vibrant, and it doesn't end there. It continues right through the building to just a very lively kind of public courtyard. And above, we'd have, really dense housing. We're kind of guessing that this might be a 12-story building total. But again, it's radical, but it can be incredibly impactful if I think we could abandon the car. I'll just show you some renders of it. So this is the kind of concept behind it. So the general target market would be middle income. Oops, I clicked too far. Middle income professionals, young professionals who have a few children or no children, or that sort of thing. Sort of like your typical city dweller, your global city dweller. Balconies, lots of balconies to promote community and camaraderie between neighbors, etc. Another view of it, of course, these shops to be on the street so that they really do just pull you in immediately, spaces for eating and dining, etc. This is a view kind of looking towards that back courtyard area, maybe at dusk, and what that back area could be like, And right now in Port of Spain, literally in downtown Port of Spain or uptown Port of Spain, nothing like this really exists. We're seeing things happening maybe in the Woodbrook area and the Newtown area, but the heart of our city really doesn't have any real sort of life. So that's a lot on Corte Duca. Oh, sorry, I forgot I have some interior renders of the space too, which is done by one of, between Stephen Homer and ourselves as well. But yeah, views of the city, imagine having an apartment and you're seeing, anyway, I know not everyone here is from Port of Spain, but you're seeing our skyscrapers. I mean, that would be so cool. A rooftop area, which of course is something that can easily in a project make or break a project, because it really does have a load impact on the structure. But yeah, I mean, it could be quite amazing, especially if it was private and specifically for the tenants. And this one is a special request of Island City. They asked me to speak specifically to the Bush House, which is my own house that I started thinking about really when I was in architecture school. I don't know if there are many architects who don't think about their own home, but I certainly am not one of them. I think about it a lot, or well, at least I did. And this is my first sketch of the Bush House in architecture school. And I kind of developed plans before I had any understanding of planning requirements and setbacks and all that. So this particular plan is way too dense, but it certainly is fantastical. Your car, of course, I don't ignore the car, but the car goes, down a floor into a garage that isn't seen on the street. And the street is really just meant to collect, your visitors and that sort of thing. I mean, it may not be as practical as I would have thought then, but I certainly would like to hope that whatever comes of this land, doesn't prioritize the vehicle. I mean, it's on a hill, so you need a car, but yeah, the goal is to try to stay true to that. So right now, this is where the Bush House is located. And we do park right here for now. And the idea is that phase 2 will happen in this general area, and there'll be an external connection connecting the two. Right now, the cost of construction of a middle-income complete home in West Trinidad can range from $147 to $220 US per square foot. And with a budget of $220,000 US, which is 1.5 million TT, that really meant that I could have only afforded an 1,000 square foot house. So, if you think about that in relation to the Savannah, it's really, 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 really small. But that's 1,000 square feet over 2 floors. So it's a footprint of 500 square feet. So that's my house. And this is what we kind of came up with. We meaning you know, me and my brain at nights because I did this when this house was built when my son was born. So it really was kind of like a after hours kind of project. But essentially this is the plan. It's a 2-bedroom home. The ground floor is kind of just dedicated to the kitchen living space with a pod room and storage underneath the stairs. Security, because I couldn't afford, you know, burglar resistant glass and that sort of thing. But I didn't want to have, you know, burglar bars on my doors. I came up with the kind of breathing cage that you see in the GIF, which allows us to feel like we have more space without actually, you know, taking away from the glass. And then on the first floor, I have 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. One of the bathrooms is really, really small and really, really tight. In reality, it annoys me so much. But I mean, you know, yeah, I have champagne taste and Maui budget. So that's what you get, right? So this is just some photos of construction and how it kind of manifested. And in your time, whenever you can read, I do have an article on it on my blog, which kind of explains as well the construction process in general in Trinidad, and what goes into it and what comes out of it. And yeah, this is the bush house. I moved in with my husband and my son when he was 5 months old. And as a woman, I felt really, really proud to have done it. And it was something I really wanted, was to have my kid in a house. And, you know, it's done. And I have to, as I say, my husband, I have to really, really thank him for his support, because generally speaking, I think that support is integral to anyone's success. And we can't expect women to move up and expect men to remain exactly the same. You know, it takes both. They have to become more involved in family life and households, etc. And it really has to be more of a partnership if we want to really affect change. Some more images of the house. All right, so just ending off my presentation on a really cool project that we have been thinking about and kind of working on at the firm, and it's been spurred on by COVID, of course, because there was a time during the pandemic where you know, we were not allowed to be in public spaces, full stop. You weren't allowed to go for a run or a walk or anything, not even with your mask on, just not allowed. And you know, it was really confusing, because I mean, what makes a public space such a threat? I mean, I know that there was so much unknown in the beginning of the pandemic, but already our public spaces in Trinidad and in Port Spain are quite dead, and this was just making them seem even more of a threat. So anyway, we came up with this idea of a catalyst in Adam Smith Square, called a hand washing station. In the end, I think we called it the wash stand, which is like a play on the typical Trinidadian old time wash stand. I don't know if anyone knows about it, but it's really a beautiful object. You know, typically there's a marble slab on top and two cabinets or space for you know, clothes, etc. But on top of that marble top, you put a bowl and you wash clothes. I know it's a small piece of furniture in a vernacular home, but it was beautiful and meaningful, and you know, generally speaking, kind of wanted to emulate that with this wash stand, not just a plastic sink that you pitch up outside of, you know, a public building to wash your hands that you think you'll take down and you'll never will. So we really wanted to think of something, and right now Adam Smith Square it's in a beautiful part of Woodbrook. It's super active. There's lots of vending, you know, lots of commerce. The scale is really nice right now in general in the area. But you know, this well-planned square right now leads to an electricity pole in the center. So anyway, we're just kind of trying to think about what we could put there instead of the electrical pole, and that would be useful and beautiful. And for now, this is kind of what we've come up with. It's a wash stand that uses the grey water to feed planters at the base of the stand, and provide some shade, and is made up the way that you would make up like a carnival stand up out of like plywood and just materials that we are familiar with that are not expensive and not foreign to us. How do you feed this wash stand? Unfortunately, that's something that we have not figured out. So far, we have figured out what the cost of a truck-borne supply coming every day and feeding it would be. But we haven't really wrapped our minds around how to keep this thing sustainable without actually getting a permanent water source to it. But this is another one of those passive interventions that we think could really, really help the city and help the community, and won't take much effort. It just takes a lot of thoughts and careful planning. And that's the end of my presentation. So thank you so much for listening, and I'm happy to talk to you guys and hear your thoughts and questions.
Thank you so much, Laura. At this point, I want to open it up for questions. I'd invite you guys to unmute. And if you want to put on your video, that's also fine. Also, please use the hand raising tool so that we can organize how questions are asked. There's one question in the chat from Leslie Ann Palmer. She asked, do you have a sense of how TTIA reacts to or approaches issues of gender in the profession? Is it talked about? Is it avoided, etc.?
How TTIA specifically?
Yeah.
I'm actually really not sure. I mean, as I said, I feel as though I have I think I take for granted how much work would have been put into where we are today with women and acceptance in the profession. So maybe I'm a bit ignorant and I shouldn't be, but I don't know what's come before. But I do know right now on the leadership team there are women, and they are very active, and I'm impressed. It's impressive, the work that the TTIA has been doing. The president is not a woman, but has once been a woman, Jennifer Smith, I believe. Oh, correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe she wasn't a president, but I believe she was. And yeah, I think that I generally think the response is positive.
Hi, this is Doreen from Island City Lab. I did have a question. Curious about your thoughts about how urban planning, particularly public transportation in Trinidad, can support high density residential buildings and buildings that, or communities rather, that rely a lot less on car and private vehicle transportation.
Yeah, so we've explored so many different things. One being, the cable car, for instance, reintroducing that. I think it will take an alternative mode of public transport, but the infrastructure has to be there to support it. And right now, Port of Spain has become very much a market culture. People vend on the streets, etc. So I think that there has constantly been a battle in Port of Spain, especially as of the recent past, with infecting change and then, but not uprooting people and the way that they are operating right now in Port of Spain. So I think that might be a bit drastic. I mean, one thing that is good about our public transport is our bus route. That works really, really well. And I think maxis work well as well. But we certainly need more parking structures, unfortunately, in the city. I personally am obsessed with a parking building in Miami. I think it's incredible, the 1111 on Lincoln Road, because it's not just a parking structure. It's just everything. It's life. It's a shop. I've seen people have their weddings there. So I mean, if we can think about the parking structure as more than just a parking structure and implement it throughout the city, then we can accommodate more cars. But I think the solution really is less in thinking about promoting walkability as well, and how our buildings can help that. How can our streets become more pleasant, planting more trees, etc. Yeah, I don't know if I skirted around your question a bit, but
no, you definitely answered it. Thank you. I see another question in the chat from Jessica Lewis. How has your architecture firm implemented sustainable practices in your client's design? You can think about particular sustainable designs that are extremely relevant for the Caribbean. So we're talking about heat reduction, we're talking about water retention, all of these things. How is your firm thinking about these stuff?
Yeah, well, as I would have mentioned, Manly was, the chief sustainability officer, and she is, LEED certified and was one of the founders of the TTGPC, the Trinidad and Tobago Green Building Council. And I think she's fought quite a battle with some of our private clients, our corporate clients, in implementing sustainable features. But right now, we are at a place where, you know, I think the corporate culture is finally catching up in Trinidad. A lot of our clients currently want to implement green strategies, you know, and it's so funny. We have a really, really important client right now who is now looking to become somehow green and to have a green agenda and to be able to produce a sustainability report at the end of a year. And they're like, you know, how can we do this? And luckily, a lot of our buildings that we would have done for them previously already think about sustainability quite deeply in terms of their building orientation, their sun shading, the amount of glazing that is used, and rationalizing that. In terms of water storage, I think that we have some work to do. I don't think that we particularly are terribly green in that way. I mean, yes, we may suggest using grey water where we can, but I don't think we do too much beyond that, and we should look at it a bit more. But those, so when, and a lot of the materials that we have specced are locally sourced, you know. For instance, in that same ITMD building that the corporate office building that I showed that I won the award recently in the beginning of the presentation, we use a veneer on kind of one of the key elements in that project, a floating heating box that is made in Martinique, you know, from a banana leaf. So and the client didn't ask for that. That's not something they wanted. But now that they know, they're like, oh, okay, well, we're on our way. There's so much more to do, and certainly we can do a lot with solar and solar storage, etc. With them. But I think that's kind of where we stand right now.
Great. Melanie Ling has her hand raised. If you want to unmute and ask the question, that'd be great.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Laura. Okay, sorry about that. I didn't have the permission. First of all, Laura, thank you for your time and for sharing all of these pieces. Really enjoyed looking at your work in Florida, and it's just been a real pleasure to see the way that and turn. It's been very, very exciting from afar. My question is, and this is sort of for you, your on adaptive reuse buildings, or the sense of preservation in Trinidad, because I realize that the firm does very modern and exciting projects, but within the local community, sense of bringing.
It is not breaking up a bit for everybody.
Sorry?
Yeah, Melanie, we can't hear you. Maybe it'd be easier to type the question in the chat.
Okay, well.
Was the question about adaptive reuse and how we kind of manifest that in Trinidad, or if we do?
Yeah, well, yes, I'm curious to know. I know while the project, if there's also a taste for adaptive reuse back home, and if
I can't hear you at all.
Oh, Ross. Okay, we'll type.
Yes, type it. Sure.
In the meanwhile, I'll ask Gianna to go ahead and ask her question.
Oh, sure. My question was actually pretty similar to Melanie, which was, what was like your approach to designing in Port of Spain? Because I really liked your project with your multi-use kind of putting housing back in Port of Spain, because I think that's really necessary, and there's nothing like that. So the question was, how do you see Trinidad kind of developing over the years? Like, do we reuse what's there, or kind of like take away and add?
No, I mean, adaptive use is not just important, but it's so exciting. I mean, there's so much potential, I think, in what is already there, and what has been abandoned or forgotten, or, you know, just ignored. And we do have some projects in the firm right now. They're more residential, that we are we have the kind of joy of converting, and it's really exciting to see the possibilities. I mean, in those sorts of projects, we work really closely with the our consultants team, so the structural engineers and the MEP, And they're not necessarily more affordable. I think a lot of clients think, okay, I'm buying this building for X and I only put in X into renovating it, but I want this, you know. So I think there's a sort of a change in mindset we have to have as we approach buildings that need attention and rehabilitation and change of use. But I think once we can sensitize our clients to the reality of the situation, we can produce some incredible work, you know. And it's as an architect, it's really exciting. It's such a fun challenge to start to work on this puzzle. And also, I think making sure that we are honest to the initial structure. Sometimes it's not possible, and sometimes the initial structure or the previous structure is terribly done. It's not done by anyone who has any kind of sensitivity at all. But in the case where it has been, and it's of note, I think, you know, trying to incorporate a new life into it usefully and meaningfully is really cool.
Oh, sorry, I just have one more question.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was also interested in your like dwelling into the carnival costume and stuff. So like, does that at all influence your architecture and design process? And how so?
I think my architecture and design process influences that. But that's from a process standpoint. From a cultural standpoint, carnival certainly influences the way that I approach, I think, people and clients in general. And you know, I think we can, as architects, operate in a bubble quite often. Like, they'll come to us, we are the thought leaders, you know, but really we have to do the groundwork. We have to become more approachable, you know. And I remember once, some years ago, the firm put on an exhibition of contemporary Caribbean architecture. It was a photography exhibition by Brian Lewis. And there was a group of students that came in from a primary school, and they were like, oh, actually, it wasn't a primary school. It might have been COSTAT, which would have been a tertiary education school. And yeah, they were just asking, oh my God, they were like, you know, we want you to design this for us. We want our home designed by an architect, X, Y, and Z. And then I know in their minds, they were like, but it can't ever happen because dollar signs, dollar signs, dollar signs. So I just think that I would love somehow to be able to bridge that gap. And to become more approachable, and for architects to become more accessible. I mean, as I said, right now there are 80-something registered architects in Trinidad, so, you know. But I do think that the profession needs to become more accessible. We have a lot to say. We have really incredible minds, and we can make an impact. And I guess it just hasn't really been happening the way that, you know, it may happen in other cities. So I think I kind of tangented from carnival, but approachability, carnival, that's how it relates to me.
I have a question, actually. I know, having been involved in architecture for about 7 years now, that the work culture from school into work is very difficult. You know, you're expected to sort of work long hours. You're expected to produce at the rate that, you know, a developer needs you to make a return on their investment. But how does this sort of aggressive work culture affect you specifically as a woman? In other words, you know, I know when I was working in New York, I had a colleague who had to leave every day at 6 because they had a child to go home to. You know, to what extent is architecture, like, specifically, the work culture of architecture specifically affecting a woman practicing in the field?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, Jordan. One thing I would say is that at ACLA, we really, really, really practice work-life balance. I think it's extremely important. We've recently kind of instituted more flexible hours. So once you get your hours in, it doesn't really matter when you come in. Well, it does matter, just, you know, within a reasonable time frame. But we don't, you know, I can't tell you the last time I've been in the office working on a project when it's, super late at night. It's just not, I think that that's all coming back to setting boundaries and how productive are you after a certain amount of hours in any case. It's really more important that we spend productive hours on projects than just, mindless numbing hours. So as a practice, it's not part of our culture to kind of push people to their limits. And I think that's probably why we have, people who have been here for so many years, they're kind of just, we invest in our intellectual capital for sure. And part of that investment is investing in acknowledging the fact that people need to have a life. And I think it's not just limited to parents, like people in general, go out, engage with other people, human beings. That's how you meet clients and you market yourself. You're stuck behind the computer all the time, then how much of that can you do? And the difference between, I think, the States and the UK, for instance, and the Caribbean is that our practices are really incredibly small. We don't have, the manpower, I think, to, just kind of chuck someone to one project. We all have to be working on different things all the time. And we don't get to pick our projects. I have colleagues from school who have been kind of working on the same type of project for years. Whereas, at ACLA, one day we could have a health clinic to work on, or a small house reno to work on, or, a big public design build project to work on. So, it's a different culture, I think, in the Caribbean than it is abroad, for sure.
A couple other process questions about working in the field. There's one in the chat from Shanae asking, does your firm have an in-house structural engineers that help consult on the structures, such as building on steep hills?
No, we don't have an in-house, but I think as architects are kind of expected to have a general understanding of what can and can't work from a structural perspective. So once we've gotten the project to a certain point, perhaps in the schematic design, we do engage, or we do recommend that our clients engage a structural engineer. And it's all, it doesn't come as a surprise. We definitely brief our clients up front on all the consultants that may be necessary, the merits to the project. And hopefully in the case of Trinidad, an engineer is more important than an architect for some reason. But that you need to have drawing stamp by an engineer for approvals through regional corporation. So yeah, they have to engage an engineer at some point. Yeah.
Thanks for that. I see that Marsha has her hand up. I just unmuted you, so you can feel free to ask your question.
Hi, good day. I want to apologize. I got busy with work and missed most of your presentation. However, I have always been, interested in the Trinidad vernacular. As part of CSA, we visited, other islands, and I was always very impressed that, the local vernacular was so present and so it always made me wonder about home and, and saying, like, we don't have a visible vernacular that we not enforce, but we like to maintain. Do you know if there have been conversations in the field to develop or to identify this vernacular and bring it back? Or, or is everything going into contemporary now?
No, not at all. We have a national trust. First of all, Trinidad and Tobago has a national trust that really was worked on and nurtured by a group called the Citizens for Conservation, of which I used to be a member. I'm not active right now, but right out of school, I was like, that's the first place I went, to CFC. And at the time when I left school, so that would have been 8 years ago, there were no buildings registered as under the National Trust as historic landmarks. And now there are several. And there's been a real thrust to kind of update, I think, I would say the Magnificent Seven. Most of them are in really good condition now. The President's House, which at the time was falling apart, the Red House, which is, a very public building in the heart of Port of Spain, very significant. So I think that there was a lot of outcry about it. And, as luck may have it, I don't know, our government actually has tried to initiate some sort of change. I mean, I would love to see it in other areas as well, like city planning, for instance.
Right. Okay, good. That was my, I'm heading, right now I work in Chicago and I'm heading back to Trinidad, and, just things like that are on my head.
Yeah, there's a whole revival of Nelson Island, which is an island off of the coast of Trinidad that has been spearheaded as well by the National Trust, and heritage tourism has been their pitch, like how can saving our built heritage economically make sense.
Right.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
There's another question in the chat from Melanie Ling. Have you tackled any healthcare projects?
Healthcare projects? No. Personally, I haven't. Sorry. That I could think of at least. No.
I mean, I think we can expand the idea of what healthcare is, not just hospitals and care facilities, but places and spaces that help with wellness. So you talked about the hand washing station. I feel like that might just fall under that category, or projects that are thinking about wellness in the design.
Yeah. Well, I suppose, honestly, I think all of our projects really think about wellness, about, the happiness and wellness of the spaces and inhabitants. But in terms of, specifically medical healthcare, no. But yeah, I don't know. Is it that she's working on a project and it has to do with healthcare in school? If so, I can point you in the right direction to people who work in healthcare architecture.
Crystal Austin has a question.
Hi, Laura. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear.
Okay. It's not really a question. It's more so like a comment. I really like the fact that you're talking about the idea that like pregnancy is not a sickness, because I just recently went through something like that. It's very interesting to see people's reaction to you when you're, in the field and, navigating it as a woman. The questions that men don't get, like, are, kind of make you feel as though you should sit down and stop suddenly because you have a child. So I thought it was nice that you included that in your presentation. And I was kind of dying with laughter when you said, you just had the baby and someone sent you a comment like, yeah, congratulations, but where's the backsplash? I was like, what? That was wild. I thought that was a wild comment, for somebody to make. So yeah, it's just very interesting to see. But I guess if I was to phrase it as a question, I know you said you went to the University of Miami, I think. Did you have a diverse range of people in that program? And also, was ACLA the first place you worked after you came out? Or did you go somewhere else before ACLA? Did you have any experiences where, that's the kind of thing?
ACLA alone, and yes, was super diverse in terms of, it was two of us from Trinidad, a good friend of mine, Kiana, and myself. It was a small program, generally speaking. I think it was like 30-something of us. But two of us from Trinidad, two people from Barbados, kids from, I had a friend from Egypt and from all over the place, Hong Kong, Abu Dhabi. Why did I say Abu Dhabi? That's not true. No, it is true. And yeah, all over the US, of course. One of my best friends, she is from Miami, and she was in the program. But it was really, really an interesting mix of people, and certainly not limited to Americans alone or whatnot. Yeah.
Well, we're at time, unfortunately. I want to thank Laura so much for doing this. We really want to start to bridge the gap between the Caribbean islands as practitioners in the built environment. So we really appreciate you connecting with us, and we look forward to hearing more about what you're doing in the future. Thank you so much for taking the time to show us your work and talk about your experiences. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jordan, and thanks, Island City, for having me. It was awesome. I really appreciate it. And thanks for the chat, everybody.
All right, guys. I'm going to close out the chat. Take care.
Bye.